Good afternoon, everyone. This is Desmond Martin from NextWaveSTEM. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. This is practical STEM applications that can be implemented in your classes today. And I want to take a moment just to clarify that when we talk about applications, we're just not talking about ways for our students to interact with their mobile devices or maybe even things like iPads that you have in your classroom. We're thinking about actual learning subjects, actual STEM subjects and learning methodologies that you can apply in your classrooms, whether you're doing remote learning or if you find yourself in a more hybrid situation. We'll take a look at some examples of what that looks like and some factors that we need to consider. Before we begin, I do want to just go over some of the ground rules. Some of us, or not so much ground rules, but some housekeeping notes, as some of us have just joined in the last couple of minutes. The first is that we are in webinar mode today. And I say it all the time, some of you may be sick of me saying it. While we know that you are very camera ready on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon, um, unfortunately, your cameras and your mics will not be open. That, however, does not mean that you are voiceless. You are able to interact with me via our chat or through our Q&A functionality in Zoom. I know most of us are probably Zoom experts by now. Um, that means that if you have any questions about anything that I'm covering, if you have any comments, anything that you'd like to ask, or if I just need to slow down and repeat something, it is completely fine for you to jump in the chat and share what you need me to know, and we'll make sure to get that answered on air. The second bit of housekeeping pertains specifically to our Illinois educators. For our Illinois educators joining us today, the session is worth 1 hour for professional development. The certificate for your attendance today will be sent out in a follow-up email this afternoon. And that way you can go ahead and claim those hours. For our educators who are not in Illinois, some of us are from some very far-flung places. Um, you can also take that certificate as proof of your attendance at today's session, if that's something that your administration is requiring. However, we do not have partnerships with out-of-state providers as of yet. That's something that we're working on and looking forward to doing in the near future. So with all that being said, we will press forward because I'm really excited about some of the low-hanging fruit we can grab with our students as we start to move more into our STEM instruction for the fall. So a great place to begin for us is at the very beginning. And let's just talk about who we are at Next Wave STEM. And I'll throw in a little tidbit about myself. Without focusing too much on what you see on your screen, Next Wave STEM at its core is in the education technology business with a focus on emerging technologies because we understand that our students are going to have to solve some massive problems. We have issues of climate change and global pandemic and some issues when it comes to even food resources here in the United States of America, potable water here in the United States of America. A lot of these problems come down to our ability to harness the technologies that we have available to us and to harness the resources that we have in really ingenious, really clever, and really dynamic ways. We think that our next generation of young learners is going to be critical to help solve those problems. I do actually agree with Bill Nye when he says that some of these young people will literally save the world. And it's with that thought in mind that we are looking for ways to empower young people in emerging technologies. Technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, drones, and 3D printing are just the start of what we want to do at Next Wave STEM when it comes to building student skills. Now, while we are intrinsically student focused, we understand that there are lots of factors and lots of resources that go into building a next generation of innovative problem solvers. And the most critical part of that equation is you, their educators. So that means that in supporting them, we serve you. At NextWaveSTEM, we offer curricula K through 12 in emerging technologies. equipment and training. We try to be a all-in-one shop so that you can come and get what you need and implement the program in your school, no matter what your format might be, whether that's in school, after school, hybrid, or remote learning. We've done some pivoting over the past 6 months to try to get to where you are, because we cannot afford to be left behind, quite frankly. Um, Myself, once again, I'm Desmond Martin. I'm the program coordinator at NextWaveSTEM, and I serve primarily as the trainer and implementer for our professional developments as a liaison between NextWaveSTEM and our schools when it comes to training in your particular course material. And my professional background is in mechanical engineering, so I do quite a bit of curricula development myself. That means that I love to get into the weeds and love to answer really great questions about Next Wave STEM and about our programs. If you've got any questions about what we do at Next Wave STEM, absolutely drop me a line. You'll see my email a little bit later on, or you can feel free to share or check out our website. I just got a chat here that Susan, you didn't get your email. Susan, don't worry. I'm save all of these chats, so we'll make sure that we get that email pushed out to you at the conclusion of our webinar today. So sorry about that. Dealing with a little kerfuffle in our automated systems, so we're going to make sure we get you sorted out. And thank you for bringing that to my attention. So now that we've kind of got the how do you do's and nice to meet yous out the way, uh, let's jump into our goals for our webinar today. Our goals today, we only have one. Really, really simple, but really, really dynamic. And we'll take our time to move through it a little bit. We want to explore the ways that students can engage in STEM learning that makes an immediate positive impact on the world around them. This is really exciting for me as an engineer in my training and my formal discipline, because this is kind of at the heart of what we do in engineering. Engineers spend their time considering ways to solve problems. If you want a very, very quick and summative definition of what an engineer is, that is someone who uses science, math, and technology as a professional problem solver. And our students are going to be able to learn some really direct, some really powerful ways of making positive impacts on the global scale and on their even state, county, local scales. It may be as simple as their block up the street, dealing with their neighbors. They can make some real changes immediately. So we're going to take a look at ways that we can help our students do that. So talking about making a globalized impact, doing work with our students and giving them resources to make sure that they can make an impact just beyond what they're learning, but they're actually doing work that applies to the real world. It's really important for us to understand the situation. What situation do they find themselves in as students? What situation do we find ourselves in with respect to being educators? And it's pretty obvious. For a lot of us, we are in hybrid instructional mode. The whole genesis of our Next Wave STEM free webinar series is the understanding that there are going to be some shifts in the way that we approach educating our children because of the ongoing pandemic. And that means that more than anything, and we've seen this play out really particularly in the last 2 to 3 months, is that we're going to be asked to be flexible. Next Wave STEM is based in Chicago, Illinois. I'm in the Chicagoland area right now. And this time last week, we had the idea that our students will begin the school year using a hybrid instructional model. And that has now changed to a not ready to return model. Schools here, CPS, will not open until at least November. So what we have to consider is making work available to our students that fits in these different instructional scenarios. that may be a situation where schools are open and actually doing instruction live right now, but we don't know exactly what the future means. So we want something that we can effectively transition into remote learning. That means that we may find ourselves in situations where we're not quite ready to return yet. There are some larger school districts all over the country that are remote only instruction right now, including Chicago, finding resources that work remote. And if we're still in our instruction, in our STEM instruction, when we get to a place where it's safe to return to school, being able to transition into that work. And then of course there's a hybrid model that a lot of districts are also working through. Taking that time and separating student populations so that there's learning at school time, remote work time, some virtualized instruction. And this becomes a cycle that hopefully not only returns our students to some sense of normalcy, some very, very far sense, but some sense of normalcy, but also gives the benefits of in-person instruction. Depending on your learning situation, things can look very different logistically. And we want to make sure that the experiences that we choose have the flexibility built in as we pursue our STEM learning goals with our students. So first and foremost, let's understand our actual scenario. And it's important that as we think about what these scenarios might be, um, especially when we think about things that involve actual live in-person instruction, we are prioritizing our student and staff wellness. So we're not going to be engaging in activities that require our students to be working really tightly together in teams unless we're able to kind of quarantine their pods. But while we're prioritizing student and staff wellness, which also means not exposing you as an educator to students in a really unsafe, really unproductive way, we also want to create high quality learning experiences for students. When we think about our actual standards alignment, what we try to learn in the earth and space realms, what we try to learn in the physical sciences and natural sciences and engineering domains, that becomes really important that we can find experiences, applications, ways for our students to make real impacts that speak to those different methodologies in different domains of learning. And then it's really, really important that for our students who have a high need for support, they may be specialized educations, English as a second language students, they may be students who are special education. Those populations also need resources that are going to be really, really effective for them. So these two things are going to be super important when you think about creating something that your students can get into right away. If you hold these factors in mind, then you're already along the right track. Access and impact. Can my students actually physically and logistically engage with the activity at hand? Will they have the equipment? Will they have a way to actually, in the case of science in particular, engage with and record observations and report observations? That may be something as simple as a cell phone, that may be a computer, that may be something more robust. Do they have or do they need a microscope? Do they have or do they need a telescope? Do they have or do they need a magnifying glass? Can they actually physically access the activity? And that's not just being able to go into physical spaces, that's also having access to their equipment and instructional needs. The second thing that's really important is think about impact. And when we think about impact, thinking not just of shooting for the largest impact we can absolutely have no matter what, but thinking about a more rounded scope of impact. And that's something that's really important when you think about what we'll talk of next. But impact and really designing where the impact is going to be. Is it the family unit? Are we solving some problems that are dealing with my family? Am I solving some problems that deal with my block? Am I solving some problems that deal with my entire city or my entire country? Those are things that we have to make sure that we're aligned with as well. So when you're having and looking for immediate things that your students can do. If you figure out the access and you figure out the impact, you're in good shape. So where do we begin? Let's talk about access. High levels of access for our student activity and student instruction comes through the lens of citizen science. Some of us may have heard of citizen science or engaged in citizen science. Some of us may have never heard of citizen science before. I may be speaking an entirely different language than you are right now. However, it is a really great place to begin because citizen science prioritizes the ability for our students and students of any kind and of any age, including students like me, to access this ability to engage science, one of our core STEM subject areas. So, what is citizen science? By inviting members of the public to solve problems through asking questions, making observations, conducting experiments, collecting data, developing low-cost technologies and open source code, we can actually advance scientific knowledge and benefit society. What we are essentially doing is crowdsourcing science. There has been so much really good teaching on the scientific method that we've been doing for literally decades here in the United States, that as we've become more interconnected through technology, through the advent and the rise of the internet, we are now in a position where we have the tools available to us at a really low cost to begin to do science, to take, make and record observations, to share observations. All of this is data. And then actually do some of the lower level data analysis with regards to the information that we are receiving. Um, this is a game changer when it comes to our students because citizen science, by and large, can be conducted independently. Our students, generally speaking, will rarely find themselves in situations where they will have to engage in, or they can't engage in social distancing doing citizen science because of the nature of crowdsourcing this kind of work. We'll talk specifically a little bit more about what that looks like in a moment, but just take this overall idea in stride as well. Um, Citizen scientists, because of their connections through technologies, really through the power of the internet, has changed everything. Um, we're able to connect to an advanced community of scientists. It's not just random Joe Schmo and Sally Mae off the street who are working together, working towards science. That's fine, but it is a larger scientific community. Scientists working in institutions, universities, think tanks who are actually designing these experiments and then reaching out to a wider population to help pull in the data that they themselves could never do on their own. And then your students are actually connecting to a robust community of other science practitioners. In building and developing and growing into that community, Joe Blow and Sally Mae may be the next Mythbuster, maybe the next Mr. Wizard, maybe the next Nikola Tesla, maybe the next Jane Goodall. This becomes a really amazing way for your students to connect over what might be their passion and to grow into an identity that we really need desperately. I cannot reinforce that enough. We desperately need a more robust science community with students and professionals who believe that their space belongs in science. And growing in scientific communities through the work of citizen science creates that really tremendous opportunity. So what are some examples of citizen science? How can we access this? How can we connect our students to it? What does it look like in our actual engagement? What are students actually going to get out of this? Well, citizen science is really, really easy to engage. There's actually a citizen science initiative through the federal government, through the Office of General Applications, I believe is the name. I'll have to double check that. But they are doing a great job of not only creating toolkits and resources for you as an educator to design your own citizen science experiments, but also highlights other experiments that you're able to join that are ongoing and may be a perfect fit for what you're looking for in your particular STEM learning goals. So I selected three because they represent not only three different subject matter areas, but they also represent three different social locations. And they speak to the situations that your students may find themselves in some different ways that allow them to remain social distance and be safe, but also make immediate impacts on the either local area around them or more globally. So the first is the New York City Cyclist Air Quality Study. This is really, really exciting. Columbia University scientist Stephen Chilrod put this together. Um, Basically, what students who are local to New York City will be able to do is, if they are cyclists, they will be able to download an application and take qualitative data on air quality in different parts of the city that they're riding in. Well, why do we care about this? What kind of direct impact will this have? What does this mean for me and my students? Well, first off, we're in a situation where we have this actually really, really interesting opportunity, and we may have seen this in the news already. Um, because of the global pandemic, we have been seeing a huge portion of the working population, not only here in the United States, but all over the world, whose travel, whose commutes have been severely reduced. We've seen millions and millions of miles in the commutes that would have happened between March and right now, August 11 this year, that have not been traveled because of the threat of transmission. And what we also want to see is, and want to learn, is the correlation between climate emissions and air quality because of this. It becomes a really, really interesting thing to study, to try to tease out from the data what the decrease in commuting miles does for air quality and how that could affect the lives of people living in this huge metropolitan area in New York. There are students who may be in New York, students who may be experiencing directly, personally, the adverse effects of negative air quality. We've seen these stories in India, we've seen these stories in Japan and Korea. We have lived these stories here in Los Angeles and in many other major industrialized areas. So we see this idea of access and impact. If your students have a bike and they're safe to travel through a metropolitan area like New York, if they have access to a cell phone and they know how to use it effectively, and if they also or like to see a direct impact in their lived environment. This is a great example of citizen science for students to do. The second example is called the plastic tide. This is from Peter Kohler from the Scientific Exploration Society of the Royal Geographical Society. So that's the other brilliant thing, and I didn't even mention this. The other brilliant thing about citizen science is that it also creates these communities, just not locally, but potentially globally. There are global scientific experiments, people from literally all 7 continents who are feeding data into these different experiments and creating these robust communities. The Plastitide is a perfect example. What the Plastitide attempts to do is engage with students and participants who live really particularly near ocean coastal areas. And we want to literally count. We are counting and cataloging different types of plastic waste that we find on the beach, taking our time, once again, with something as simple as a cell phone and a checkbox as they're doing a walk. The goal of that is to catalog locations and plastic waste so that we can actually build robust data about where plastic waste is coming from, and then when it gets in our ocean, where it ends up. So once again, we have this idea of access and impact. Access, if our students live along a coastal area, and this might not even be necessarily a ocean area. Those of us in Chicago, I'm originally from Michigan, who live in the Great Lakes regions of the United States may participate in a study like this as well. All we need is access, physical access to those spaces. That includes the ability to travel to and from those spaces. We need an actual recording device, once again, a cell phone, and our ability to input data into that device and share that device via the internet. And then when we think about impact, this impact becomes much, much, much more globalized. Understanding the paths through which plastic travels in our water tables and on our tides really changes our idea of who is affected the most by plastic waste, what the negative effects of plastic waste are on those particular ecosystems where plastic ends up, and helps us make some really more informed decisions around the way that we treat and that we handle our plastic waste more generally. So your walk on the beach that you might take to relax can also become this really robust way to engage in science. The third and final one, and this one might be my favorite, is called Track a Tree UK. And I included this one because it's important to understand that citizens of science is something that our students might have the opportunity to engage in. And while we're crowdsourcing, not every project is global, but we can find the seeds of effective citizen science ideas from these other globalized experiments. Track a Tree UK is conducted by Christine Tansey from the University of Edinburgh. Christine Tansey is really kind of getting granular, assigning or allowing the student to go out and pick a few trees, not necessarily engaging the entire forest, but to pick a few trees within the context of that forest and monitor it over time. What we're looking for is really the ability to get lots and lots of information about lots and lots of specific organisms. And then by looking at those specific organisms, giving us now the opportunity to understand the effects of climate change in some really, really particular ways on those organisms. That data gets more rich, gets more robust. And for students who are in the United Kingdom, all over the United Kingdom, that's work that they can do to speak specifically to their local flora in this case. But there is no reason why a similar citizen science example could not take place in any part of the world that has trees and has people and has a way to record and share information. Track a Tree could happen in Illinois. Track a Tree could happen in Alabama. Track a Tree could happen in Martinique. Track a Tree could happen in Laos. Anywhere that there's trees and a persistent internet connection, or maybe not even a persistent internet connection, we can go and we can do this kind of work of understanding the effect of climate change on these particular organisms. And once again, this is a globalized kind of impact. Global in the fact that climate change is a global phenomenon, but also local in that we understand in a more robust way. the effects on our local ecosystem and local ecology. So these are really just some high-level examples of citizen science. Investigate citizen science. That's something that your students can do at distance that you can participate in as an instructor as well, and you can guide them along the path that they need to go in terms of their science instruction. So we talked about access. Access is really important when we think about citizen science, and we see that impact can be global, but depending on the kind of outcomes we really want to see from our students, the ways in which their physical work will be used in their communities or more globally, we may want to focus on actual applications on programming that allows us to make a larger or more visible or more apparent impact in our communities. And in that situation, we think about focusing not just on work that's done remotely, but things that require a little bit more resources, and that may be done more in the classroom. And in that's where we get kind of more into my wheelhouse, because we can think about using emerging technologies that we have availability to as our school resources, or that we make availability for, and our student resources. Emerging technology really becomes our friend, especially if we're in situations where we are teaching open for instruction, or we're doing hybrid learning. So the really important thing to understand is that the options are there to do both remote learning and in-school instruction. And the examples that I go to quite often as my fallbacks are drones and 3D printing. Drone and 3D printing technology, both are the kind of applications that allow us to make instruction available to our students remotely and in person, in hands-on, tangible ways that will bear hands-on real-world benefits. When we think about drones, we're engaging computer science and engineering principles, and we're living in these two spaces where we have digital work and physical work being done. In the digital space, we're programming, either drag or drop, akin to scratch coding, or for our students who are more robust in the computer science curricula, in their computer science education, they may be coding their drones using Python. And in this case, we can actually simulate and even simulate use case scenarios for our drones, actually digitally fly this drone. That's the kind of work that's amazing for remote work, but connects to the in-person work that we do with our drones, because all that coding, all the programming, all the simulation, we can actually connect to the physical drone. We can save, connect, run, and then see this drone perform in the real world. That aha moment, that light bulb going off, where our students take so much of the work that they've done in computer science and then make that work real by connecting it to the piece of hardware, becomes a tremendous learning opportunity. And the same is true with 3D printing. 3D printing, once again, we are selecting a technology that lives and has real tangible hands-on work to be done at the digital space and in the physical space. For 3D printing, our students, by and large, will need to learn a new design skill from scratch when we think about computer-aided design. This also plays up their art education. It is a really, really dynamic way to teach across different subject matters. But 3D printing is powerful because they'll have to engage the engineering design process. We're going to be solving some real problems, and usually in 3D printing, we're solving those problems through the creation of a physical artifact. There's, for lack of a better word, product design that's going on, which is a little bit different than all of what we encompass when we think about engineering. Engineers work with both products and processes to solve problems. 3D printing really gives us the ability to solve many of those problems through products. So as students are working in 3D printing, they are doing cloud-based design. Once again, the access is relatively low. As long as they have a computer, a Chromebook works for this as well. They're able to design their physical objects and iterate on the design of those physical objects. Those assets live in Google Classroom if your school is a Google school, and can be iterated on and commented on and changed from your perspective as the educator. Um, we are working through that design cycle where students will ideate, create, and iterate so that they can get to a better physical solution for the object that they're actually designing. And even digitally, we can simulate the print process. Um, the amazing thing about 3D printers is that they are diverse. There are tons of different 3D printers from tons of different companies, and they all do similar things, but they do them a little bit differently. The analogy that I make all the time is to the automobile sector. There are dozens of different brands making dozens of different vehicles per brand, different sizes, different price points, different hauling capacities. But at the end of the day, your car, more than likely than not, has four wheels on the road, a steering wheel in your hands, and it uses some kind of fuel to get you from point A to point B, whether it's a Honda or a Mercedes. And your 3D printer is taking a digital file, converting it into something that the machine can understand, taking some kind of raw material, and then robotically constructing that raw material into a solid 3D object. Um, you might have something just as big as your computer, you might have something the size of a closet, but at the end of the day, your printer is doing those two things. Um, so digitally, we can actually do the work of digitally converting that 3D printing file that we've been working on and converting that file into something that a physical machine can actually understand and actually print. While our students won't be able to physically print themselves, they'll be able to prepare that print, walk right up to the precipice, and literally walk into your school with a thumb drive or a flash drive or something that they've shared with you on Google Classroom, and hit a button on your printer, two maybe buttons on your printer, and their print is going. Or if we may be in a situation where that learning might be remote for an extended amount of time, we may print for them and deliver their objects to be worked on and iterated and used. Or we may farm that printing all together to a third-party printing company. They exist. They can take our students' files and turn those prints around. Some of us have printing services for 3D printers even in our libraries. There are lots of logistical ways that we can get to the final product when we think about 3D printing. So we've got drones and we've got 3D printing. Where does the impact come in? We know that can work logistically, both out of school time and school time, remote learning, traditional class instruction, and the interweaving of those two when we think about hybrid learning. Where does the real world impact lie for our students there? Let's start with 3D printing because it really pertains to the situations that we find ourselves in daily now. Our lives have changed because of the real world problem of COVID-19. Here we are in 2020, still dealing with this very real problem from last year. But the 3D printer allows our students to engage in this idea of citizen engineering, taking their work that they've been doing and applying them in such a way where the citizens, their neighbors, their community leaders, people who really need these solutions might have access to these solutions. What can we design and print? What can we iterate? What can we make better for our community members? Well, we've seen, once again, lots of really great stories during this entire time that many of us have been in quarantine and been responding to this crisis about the kind of really powerful protective equipment that students have been able to design and manufacture with their 3D printers. We're thinking about lead filtration devices for homes. If we think about something like the Flint water crisis, where we see lead service lines create huge problems with community health. And in areas, many industrial areas all over the country, they're seeing similar problems. 3D printing provides some of the solutions, some of the customized solutions that helps mitigate those problems. But more specifically, personal protective equipment, things like face masks, shields and respirators, and even what we call assistive touch devices, things that allow you to interact with the world around you, say door handles or bags or straps without touching them, so that you're really eliminating high touch areas from your physical person. Those things can be manufactured, can be designed, can be put through the engineering design process with your students and made available to members of the communities to make a real difference. This is part of the way that your students can actually help beat this crisis that we find ourselves in. And kind of in that same hand, we think about the real world problems that we can find even logistically, and in some fundamental ways in our democracy, when we think about the importance of the post and parcel delivery. Um, and this actually walks hand in hand when we think about the problem of COVID. One exacerbates the other. So when we think of students, once again, practicing citizen engineering, we're thinking of the delivery of essential and remote items. We're thinking of situations where we may not have logistically have the staff to handle things like medical deliveries for really vulnerable populations. Drones may be a solution to make sure that we do not expose someone who's particularly vulnerable transmission, or we don't expose a delivery person who may be particularly vulnerable to transmission through the exchange of a delivery. But we're also thinking about drones as assistive protective devices for our populations who are having a problem moving around. The drone being able to go and retrieve objects and bring them back to us becomes a really useful tool. And we're seeing drones now even being used more with responses to emergency response and rescue applications. If we are unable to find a person who's lost, or if we need to really use data from the drone to understand, in the instance of a fire, the safety of that structure, the drone becomes a remote way to allow us to work safely through those globalized problems. And our students are not on the sidelines of this. They have the ability to learn and work through the operation, the actual legalities and safety procedures in operating their drones, and actually plan and fly both manually and autonomously, both simulations and trials for these kind of applications. This is immediate impact for what your students might see and problems that they and their immediate neighbors, their cohorts, you might be experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So lots of information there, kind of hit you with a fire hose of information. But hopefully we've got this idea, um, is this ability to see access and impact as the two really vibrant factors here that allow us to make immediate, hard-hitting impact with our students when you think about STEM activities and applications. Just got a really good question here from Eric. Eric writes, this practicing citizen engineering project with drones assisting emergency response or assistive protective devices is very interesting. Is there a resource bank that relates to this topic? Eric, there is. I'm going to make sure to email you out this resource, not only specifically this resource, but we're going to make an addition to the slide deck at the end of our presentation today with some other resources with respect to citizen science. When we share out our slide deck, that PDF will actually be clickable. So there'll be resource banks not only to drones used with respect to solving some problems, but to a whole host of other citizen science activities as well. Great, great question. So the big question now for us becomes, okay, what can we do to help? What does NextWaveSTEM have to kind of help solve this problem for you as well? Well, the first thing is what you're currently engaged in. We have our upcoming webinar dates. These webinars are free and will continue to be free for you to attend. Our next webinar is next Tuesday. We found a convenient time on Tuesdays, where we're going to be focused on how to teach STEM in a culturally responsive manner. Something that we've also become much more aware of is the importance of creating identities for all of our students when we think about STEM education. At NextWave STEM, we believe in diversity of our student populations, of our instructors, being a really big value. And that's something that we think that you believe in as well. So we want to talk about ways to be responsive to our students' needs when they may come from diversity of cultures. We're hoping that you can join us for that. The second way that we can help you is actually through our instruction. Because of the nature of COVID forcing a lot of the work that we do in instruction online, as educators, we want to pivot and make sure that you can have access to those resources. That means that we are doing remote live instruction for students. And we do those in two ways, both hands-on and completely remote without equipment. In our hands-on experiences, we will actually deliver or have the equipment delivered to your students, and we are working with our virtual instructors, running them through those learning goals and targets as they're working with the technology. The online experience, they're simulating the experiences of these technologies as they are working towards their learning goals. If you're interested in that for your in-school or out-of-school instruction, you can reach out to us and learn more at hello@nextwavestem. And at NextWaveSTEM, we, once again, really think it's important to empower you as the educator. I mentioned before, but I'll mention a little bit more now, that at NextWaveSTEM, our curriculum spans K through 12, computers and AI, robotics, drones, and 3D printing. That's important for us, not only because we want to do the instruction, but we want to empower you to do the instruction. So that means that we license this curricula. And we license this curricula for you to use in any way that you see fit. That means that however format you want to work this into your own curricula, our curricula is next generation science standards aligned, and is focusing on taking your students who may have very little knowledge of the emerging technology, taking you who may have very little knowledge of the emerging technology, and letting you in a hands-on ways for these ideas in computer science. And also developing robust 21st century skills. We want to make sure that you have a resource that is available and that is adaptable to both in-school, hybrid, and out-of-school remote learning applications. So lots of information. We actually had a really good question about citizen engineering. And I want to pause right here just for a few moments. If you had any other questions, we would love to hear what you have. So I'll just take a moment to let those fingers start flying on your keyboards. And there is no such thing as a bad question. Oh, Mary, great question. How do you become a virtual instructor for NextWaveSTEM? Great question. I would encourage you to email hello@nextwavestem.com. Email me hello@nextwavestem.com with the subject line interested in becoming a virtual instructor. We'll connect you with our head of operations, Sugandhi Chugani. She's also a school partnerships manager as well. We will learn more about you and see if you're a great fit for us. If so, we'll train you and get you going along the right path. That's the first time I've gotten that question. That's awesome. We'd love to hear from you. Are there any other really good questions? Just pause for a moment. How do we support with motivating students to collect data for citizen science? This is a tremendous question. Supporting students in collecting data can really boil down to making sure that the students are engaged in the choice of the project. This idea of kind of coming over and imposing something that our students might not care about or might not interact with, or in this situation, go out of their way with respect to social distancing protocols and safety because of the pandemic, can become a real impediment. So the first thing I'd say is allow your students some free range to choose. In your class, I think it's actually okay for your students to be doing separate and multiple and varied citizen science projects. One citizen science project group may be focused on observing butterflies. Another group may be focused on astronomy. Still a third group may be focused on microweather and climate change. Aligning the interests, something as simple as doing a poll and say, okay, what projects are interesting you the most here, allows our students to be invested. And when they're invested, they're interested in doing data collection and engaging with that community. Really, really good question. Zachary, how do you connect these projects to grade and core standard? Or is this meant to increase STEM awareness and interest? Really great question, Zachary. Generally speaking, citizen science is not quite designed to connect to our grade and core standards. However, there is a really robust toolkit that I will also include in our resources that I send out afterwards that allows you as an educator to even design your own citizen science experiment. That means that if we're focused on, for example, our 3 through 5 natural sciences in NGS, and that's a big swath. I forget how many standards there are. So we may be only focusing on 1 or 2. But we're able to jump into this ourselves. And the great thing about working with community and citizen science is that you're able to interact with the lead scientists and their lead team. That means that there's potentials for collaboration. When you think about, okay, what are my scientific goals? Let's take a look at the standards. Are there ways that we can even adjust and tailor this experiment to focus on our particular course and grade standards? That becomes something that now we can engage in a rigorous way and with some real fidelity. So, amazing question, Zachary. There are so many good questions. I want to make sure that we just take another moment. Some fingers may still be flying when you think about it. I'm ready. You guys have got me limber and on my toes. Love these great questions. Well, we may have exhausted all of our questions for right now, but I love, love, love receiving questions in my email after the fact. And so here's my information. In the some point part of your screen, you might be able to see my face in color. Well, in the middle of your screen, there's my face in black and white. I'm once again Desmond Martin, program coordinator, Desmond at nextwavestem.com. They decided that my email should be really easy. You can also locate NextWaveSTEM on all major social media networks. That means Twitter, that's Instagram, that is Facebook. No TikTok as of yet, and maybe no TikTok in the future. There's a little bit of a political uproar about that. So I used to say that I don't tick and I don't talk, but that might be a joke I have to throw into the trash can now. Um, Reach out to us is the short version of that long aside. We love to talk with you. Any questions that you have about anything about the webinars today or courses, ways for you to build STEM in your school and build identity and interests, we would love to connect with you and your students. But with all of that being said, I want to once again thank you all so much for joining us today. It is my pleasure to continue to do these webinars. We're really excited to do this each week and to continue to engage you as educators who are interested in STEM. We're also looking forward to next week's webinar on August 18th, focusing specifically on how to teach STEM in a culturally responsive manner. That is going to be a webinar I think that really speaks to the potential for social emotional learning. And once again, we're really getting to our core goal, which is more students from really amazing backgrounds who are going to help us literally save the world and make the world a better place. But until we see you at that time, we're asking that you please stay safe and be well. And we will speak with you all next week. Thank you so much and have a great day.